This is a production of Cornell University.
Welcome to the Barbara and David Zalaznick reading series, sponsored by the Department of English Program in Creative Writing. The reading will be followed by a short Q&A, and that will be followed by a reception upstairs in the English Department Lounge, Goldman Smith 258. The Zalaznick Endowment allows us to bring to campus writers who are doing work right now that is altering the way we experience ourselves and our culture. They are writing out of an urgency that inspires them to define an experience or a vision that no one else has quite captured. One of those writers is Desiree Cooper, whose first book, a collection of short stories titled Know the Mother, was published only 3 years ago and has become already an influential book. Desiree Cooper was born in Japan and spent 9 years there before she reached the age of 15. Her father was in the Air Force and was sent to Japan on 3 tours of duty. Later, she lived in Colorado, New Mexico, Florida, Michigan, Virginia. For the past 30 years, she's lived in Detroit, where she was an attorney for several years and subsequently became a journalist, a Pulitzer Prize-nominated journalist for the venerable Detroit Free Press. While working for the Detroit Free Press, she became a founding board member of Cave Canem, an institution that provides residencies and support for Black American poets. Since Desiree Cooper is not a poet, or anyway, not quite yet, it took a generosity of spirit and time to help found an organization that would not be catering to prose writers. In the meantime, though, a fellowship for fiction writers from the African diaspora has been established, the Kimbilio Fellowship, and Desiree Cooper now holds one of those awards and previously also held a Kresge Fellowship. Know the Mother is a slender book that shelters a colossal project. It contains 31 short stories in only 122 pages. The collection is not linear. There is no single narrative pulling the pieces together, no single main point of view character, but it does, by the end, begin to define what it is like to inhabit a female body with its private burdens and demands and pleasures and heartaches. Then there's the public body. Out in the world, the female body is sometimes defined, sometimes controlled, sometimes ignored by strangers in power. In Know the Mother, the female body out in the world is a Black female body that must sometimes reside under the strictures of an alien culture. It may or may not be given permission to have a baby while also having a job. Or it may find, while at work in the office, that it is in the middle of a miscarriage, something that must be kept a secret from every colleague. There are mothers, daughters, grandmothers, and girl children in this book. There are also sons and fathers. Some of the stories are tender, some funny, some anguishing. All of them ask you to read them again as soon as you reach the last sentence of a given story. These stories already have been classified as flash fictions. That's a label I don't want to accept without qualification. While the word flash may signify speed and sparkle, the term flash also signifies something that comes and goes. That's the part of the definition I would like to set aside. Because the stories of Desiree Cooper, although brief and although beautiful, have a light that is not going to dim and disappear. Please join me in welcoming Desiree Cooper.
Oh my goodness, that was lovely. Thank you so much, Stephanie. And I want to thank all of you for ordering the most perfect autumn day ever made today. I have not been to Cornell before. I was in Detroit for 30 years, adulting in Detroit. And I recently moved to the Virginia Beach area 3 years ago to care for my parents, both of whom have Alzheimer's. And so I gave up autumns for the Atlantic. I will say it was a fair switch. I'm enjoying being near the beach, but what magic to invite me here and at the prime of the colors on such a beautiful day. I just really do appreciate it. And I do want to thank the Department of English here for having me. It's been a really lovely day. Some students that I talked to are all kind of glommed over there. Hello, we had such a good talk this afternoon and good food. And thank you to Barbara and David Zalaznick, is that how you say it? For funding this series. And to John Leonard, who reached out to me a few years ago. I'm not actually sure how this happened, but somehow something happened, and I ended up writing or submitting a story that went into Okey-Panky and ended up being selected for Best Small Fictions 2019, which, yay, just out of nowhere. So a lot of kismet is happening here. Stephanie, that was great, so thank you for that. All right, so you can tell I'm a woman full of gratitude. And one reason I am is because I have gone from a female child, a little girl, to a young woman, to an, I can say old woman now, I think, with all this gray in my hair. And in between, I was also a witch. A witch because it was very difficult for me to talk in many circles about my complete ambivalence to motherhood. I had a very difficult time. I have two children who are now 28, turning 29, and 31. I had a really hard time with babies, And I used to talk in social circles and say things like, I just hate babies. And people would look at me like my hair was on fire. You're just not allowed to talk about those things. And I will say, just in case you're worried about me, my grandchildren I'm just over the moon in love. And so I'm glad I lived long enough to find out that even though I am a witch, actually, I also have room for babies in my cold, dark heart. But the point of Know the Mother is exactly mining some of those places that we are not allowed to really articulate as women, and how women take on this mantle of mother that's so iconic and archetypal, and they have to shoulder a very big thing. Mind you, fathers do as well, but I've never been a father, so that's going to be a book that'll have to go down the road. But I have gone through the mother phases, and I'm even caring for my mother, and I'm even writing about becoming the mother of my mother now. It's just a lot. And so that's what I have explored in this book. So I want to start with the stories. Many go from, all of them are about gender. Many go from gender to layer on class, to layer on race, to layer on all three. And so I'm going to try to take you through that progression a little bit. So the first one, the title story, is called Know the Mother. As I wash my mother's back, her scent fills my nostrils. Already she smells like a garden unearthed, a freshly dug grave. I soak the cloth in warm water and witch hazel, and she sighs as I swab her shrunken thighs, her shriveled feet. Don't leave me, I plead beneath my breath. She twitches and my heart leaps. Maybe she's changed her mind and has decided to stay with me a little longer. But for the next 3 hours, she gives me nothing to hold on to, not one fluttering eyelid, not a wan smile of possibility. She's leaving me so easily, I wonder if her love ever rose above duty. 2 months ago, I was bringing warm sheets up from the dryer in the basement, and as I reached the top of the stairs, I could hear Mother singing. I dashed around the corner, half expecting to see her remaking her bed, lifting the mattress to miter the corners. But when I reached her room, nothing had changed. Her hair was still a thin layer of down. Her cheeks were still sallow. Her shoulder blades jutted beneath the summer blanket, as if she were hiding her favorite book beneath the covers. Yet somehow, as she slept, she was a young woman again, singing. At her bedside, I doze without resting. I dream that my mother is dressed in a black taffeta gown. Her cheeks are rouged with stage makeup, her eyes shimmering. On cue, she makes her way to the curtain. I call her name 3 times, but nothing I say can make her look back. So I wrote that story 20 years ago. And people often say, actually I wrote it at a Cave Canem, and people say, or ask me, are your stories autobiographical? And here I am, 20 years later, taking care of my mother. At the time, though, I was not, and had not taken care of anyone elderly. But the story was true all the same. Because if there's one thing that we know in America, our public policy toward ushering human beings into the world and ushering them out of this life is to get a girl to do it. That's the official public policy. Preferably free. So if it's not a girl, a woman in the family, often the only daughter, then it's going to be a low-wage worker that's probably female. This cannot continue to be our public policy. And, you know, I love my parents and I'm glad to be with them. But I think about people, and I know people who have moved in with exes, like people they have divorced they didn't like so much. But there was no other way to care for this human being that means something, whose life is important. Women are losing millions of dollars at the height of their earning when they have to stop working or reduce their work in order to care for the elderly. This can no longer be our public policy. I just want to throw that out there for voters, okay? So that one was straight up gender, and so is this one. It's called Morning Chair. And the word morning is spelled M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, morning chair. Does anybody know what a morning chair is? In a lot of Southern Baptist churches, the young people who had not yet been baptized, in Baptist churches, you don't christen a child at birth. The child has to come to accept the faith and then be baptized when the child decides to accept the faith. And so the children who have not yet been baptized, for some reason it's called morning chairs. They sit like in front, like on a bench in front of the church on the morning bench or the morning chair until they are able to be baptized, and then they sit with the congregation. That has absolutely nothing to do with the story, by the way. Okay. I wish this seat were a rocking chair. Then I could pretend that this is just another long night in the nursery, you burning hot in my arms. But it's not a rocking chair. and you're not in my arms. I'm sitting in your grandmother's chair, the faded blue one with the overstuffed cushions of worn brocade. You once said that you'd wish we'd throw that chair out. It was so embarrassing, especially after that time you brought a boy home, the one from the football team that made you look like a matchstick in comparison. Your father sat him in this chair and grilled him before your first date. I've moved from the chair to the living room window so that I can have a view of the street through the shears. The only time I've left this chair all night was to check the clock at least an hour ago. Or maybe it was 10 minutes ago. Or maybe I've been sitting in a chair by a window for 17 years since the day you were born. All evening, I've been rising eagerly each time I see headlights cutting the darkness. I fall back into the sorrowful cushions whenever the car's slow and pick some other anxious mother's driveway. That is so perfect. I was just talking about driving and we're navigating. But I'm becoming smarter, like a woman on the maternity ward who's roused only by the sound of her own baby's cry. I'll know when the right car turns the corner. The knot in my stomach will suddenly unfurl. The street is long silent. I've begun to prepare myself for the worst. What if the next car that comes around the corner is a cruiser? I've rehearsed my description of you. My daughter is easy to recognize, officer. She has a scar by her left eye, a tangle with Ginger, her moody cat. She has her father's high, caramel cheeks that always make her look like she's just finished laughing. The gap in her teeth, passed down to her from the tribes of West Africa, has been closed with silver braces. And she has her grandmother's deep gray eyes, the same grandmother who watches over me now as I sit in her blue chair. My daughter is easy to recognize, officer. She's the one with her heart beating in my pocket. I shift in the chair and take another sip of tepid, oily coffee. I have to use the bathroom, but instead I begin to pray for forgiveness. Maybe my sinful thoughts that night so long ago is why God has put me in this chair by this window tonight with you out there somewhere, lost to me. That night I was full of you, full to popping, 9 months pregnant and a whole week overdue. I sat weeping in this very chair for God to take both of us right then and there. I didn't want to live, and I didn't want to leave you behind. I was tired of the double habitation of my body, the split duties of my soul. I wanted to be complete again, alone with myself, whole. I wanted my old appetites, my small, unswollen feet, my easy greeting of the day. You took those from me and replaced them with unknowable fears, unsoothable pain, insatiable dread. I prayed all night as I paced by the cabinet of poisonous things, by the drawer of sharpened knives. I thought about throwing myself down the stairs or starting the car in the garage. Somehow, I held on to my own life while your grandmother's spirit held on to yours. In the morning, I woke up in this chair, exhausted and full of shame. The next hour, the pains came. You'd smell the danger and gotten out. Daughter, they weren't tears of joy that I cried the moment you arrived, mewling and fetal, with your lips already painted red. They were tears of relief that the waiting was over. We would spend the rest of our days learning how to live apart. Here comes the car. My throat clutches. This is the one. 4 houses away, the driver cuts the engine and turns off the headlights. The car coasts to our driveway. The car door opens and out you tumble. You giggle as your date pulls you into a drunken hug, gives you a deep kiss. You push him back and look around guiltily. You know that I am always here, always watching. He grabs your hand and leads you to the steps. I want to throw open the door and damn you for your selfishness. The front door creaks open and I hear footsteps. I've been waiting for this moment all night, but now I'm afraid of how much I hate you. I hide behind sleep. Ma, I feel your presence, electric. You used to be mine. Now you're someone else's. I smell perfume, smoke, and fresh mouthwash. There's a heaviness over me, a warm cloak. You've covered me with a blanket. You kiss the top of my head gently. I want to hold you, pummel you, smell the sweet curve of your neck. I'm home, you whisper. How many of you guys have ever want to kill someone you love? And quiet as it's kept, many, many, many women fantasize about suicide while pregnant. For many, or thankfully most, it's a fantasy or a passing feeling, but it comes. And women are not allowed to even talk about that, about the exhaustion of the process, because it is 24/7 once it begins. And also it's very isolating, or can be, because it's very common that people around do not know exactly what it is or what you're going through. And of course, because of the commercials and the nice music and the butterflies and all that stuff, you're not supposed to say, this really sucks. Today, in this minute, the next minute it's wonderful. So now I'd like to read you a story that those were gender, very narrowly focused on gender, on woman. I do want to add one that now layers class onto the conversation of gender. So a watchword these days is intersectionality, which I cannot stand. And the reason I can't is because intersectionality, if we remember the Venn diagrams, like the overlapping section is the intersection, right, of these two universes. But intersectionality is supposedly to describe a wholeness of a person in these different worlds. So I am right now 100% woman. I identify as a cisgender, like she, her, hers woman. I'm African American, that's how I identify racially. 100% of me, not an intersection of me. I've now added a woman of a certain age. I turn 60 next year. So my age is now very much a part of my, it always has been, but now it's really a part of my identity. I'm a grandmother. You're not supposed to call me the G word. I'm Jaja. There's all these things, but they're 100% of me. There's not an intersection of me of which there's one of these things not included. So that's why I hate that word. It's not descriptive. Like hologram or something would be better. But I have in stories tried to separate them out a little bit so that you can maybe digest the weight in separate bites. So now I want to add class onto this construct of gender. So this is called To the Bone. Daily, a piece of crackling bread, a bowl of boiled turnips, fried fatback. Pa and the boys would get extra pieces of the salty meat whenever there was any to be had. They worked at the mill and they needed their strength. Sometimes Pa would save the tough meat rinds and sneak them to me before he left for work. When I'd feel faint while boiling shirts, I'd stick a piece in my mouth, letting the smoky flavor of his kindness fill me up. I learned early how to live on bone and gristle. At least I got to suck the marrow of bones and gnaw on the juicy gristle. Aletha Ruffin was so skinny, her cheeks sunk in where her teeth used to be. They called her chicken legs. Her hair was a thin nest of wire and husk. When she smiled, you thought death was coming. Once Mama sent me to school with a buttermilk biscuit stuffed with pear preserves, and Aletha let the waters of her mouth run just like a dog waiting for scraps at the back door. What could I do but give it to her? She grabbed the biscuit, and without a thank you, she never looked me in the eye again. They say the county came and took away the Ruffin children, but sometimes I wonder if they just dwindled down to nothing and disappeared. There are ways to keep from dwindling down to nothing. Eat from the root, savor the skins, feast on gizzards, tongues, and hearts. Sop your bread in pot liquor, scrape crackling from the pan to make a gravy taste like a meal. Lard your belly. Trade a dime for a pickle so sour it will lock your jaws. When your eyes start to sparkle and your hips round out, sway sweetly in front of a man like a ripened berry ready to be plucked. The blackberries were ripe for plucking this summer. I swayed in front of Thalius Jones. In the back of his uncle's pickup, he sunk his teeth into my tender flesh, gripped the rounds of my hips. "Girl, you give a man something to hold on to," he said. That Christmas, he bought Mama 2 bright oranges and Pa a bunch of raisins still on the vine. We got married in the spring. When I sat at the table with Thalius, he spooned up his turnips into my bowl. "Eat up," he said. "I'ma have me a big fat baby." Tessie was a big fat baby. Everywhere I went, folks would draw in a breath and say, "Woo, wee, look at that girl." I'd shine her up with Vaseline, gather her thick hair in a bow, and parade her at the 5 and dime. I walked one-sided with her on my hip. When Thalius would come home in the evening from the post office, the kitchen would be heavy with the smell of fried pork chops and onions. He'd holler, "Where's my big bone girls?" Until the day she grew up and got married, Tessie would always run to him first. He'd take her moon face with both hands, let his thumbs run over her velvet skin, and tell her she was the prettiest girl in the world. My granddaughter Madison has the velvety complexion that her mom always had, and a face as wide and self-satisfied as the moon's. She used to let me pinch her delicious thighs, and she blushed when Thalius called her pork pie. But now Madison's 13 and growing up. She gets mad at the things that used to make her smile. Last week, I took her school shopping for those pair of jeans that fit like the skin of an onion. The lady in the store frowned and said, "We don't carry those large size here, sweetie." The moon went into shadow, and I couldn't cheer Madison up, even with a bowl of Haagen-Dazs. The moon is shadowed by evening clouds as I set a bowl of my home cooking in front of Madison. At 16, she is now so thin, I worry how she'll ever become a blackberry ripe for picking. "Eat," I say, spooning Madison more food. She eyes my prosperous waist. "No thanks, Nanny," she says politely. Her eyes have no sparkle, like the eyes of the alabaster girls in the magazines. She pushes around the food I have cooked for her, but I eat without shame. Braised turnips, ham, and crackling bread. Does this story evoke anything for folks? I'm kind of used to a more interactive setting. Does it bring up anything for anyone? Reactions? I'm sorry? Traumatic memories. Okay. I feel like I want to ask you to expound, but I'm kind of afraid to. I don't want to delve into your personal experiences, but if there's something that is within the confines of the story, I'd love to hear that.
Just a lack of food.
Yes. Yes. So there are 3 generations. The response was a lack of food. It brought up traumatic memories. It brought up things about like a lack of food and then unwanted comments about your bodies, right? And of course, we know that women are more subjected to this than men are. But there is both a cultural dimension and a financial dimension to this. There was a time, and there still is a time, where people feel really lucky to be able to eat all they want. You know, it's not about, I can't eat this, or I had a muffin this morning, so I'll only have celery today, this afternoon. It's not about that. It's about, when's the next meal coming? And you're stupid not to eat when you can. And there are cultures that still hold the value of the larger you are, the more prosperous you must be. It's a sign of wealth. It's a sign of health. It's a status. So in this story, we have 3 generations, and we see how that morphs over time, where the grandmother remembers the roughened girl who looked like a walking skeleton, whose mouth watered watching other people eat. And her value is, I'm not going to be shy about eating. I am grateful to be on this earth and have this bounty, and I'm going to enjoy eating. And then we get to the middle, who's skipped a little bit, but she has a granddaughter who now, by the time the granddaughter comes along, is very conscious of being judged about her body type and about how she eats. And is reminded around every corner, not that she is prosperous or lucky, but that she's fat. And we don't really know if she is or not, right? It's more like the perception that the world has put onto her. And so that is a dimension of being a woman, of being a mother. Also that the perception of sort of like the rounder you were, the more fertile you were, the more desirable you might be as a wife, because you could have children easily. I don't know how true that is, but that was certainly an idea that many women grew up with. That is certainly not the idea anymore, right? And so this was a way to kind of span time and really talk about the concept of not only just the body size, but eating in general, and the relish or the shame with which we eat and why. Like today it's shameful. Last night I had a big bowl of pasta by myself in the restaurant, and it was like 9 o'clock. I don't usually eat like Europeans, Listen, I live with senior citizens. I am there, the door opens at senior hour at 4:30. So, and I had this big bowl of pasta sitting by myself, and I'm just thinking about it. I had the thought, oh my God, I hope nobody saw me scarf down this whole bowl of pasta. I mean, I really thought that. Like, why would I think that? I was hungry, and I hadn't had dinner. Like, why would that even come through my head? Somebody had seen it. It would have been ugly. I will admit that. But the point being that there's so much shame around how much you eat, when you eat. Are you vegan? Do you eat animals? It's like, whoa. It's a little over the top these days. And that's something I wanted to mine. All right, so this next one goes more directly into mother and race. And it's called The Disappearing Girl, which for me was sort of a play on The Invisible Man. So here goes. My minivan churns impatiently as I wait in the long queue. Up ahead, it's easy to spot my daughter in the gaggle of starched, school-crested shirts and navy blue pants. She's the only one with brown eyes and skin to match. She's the only one whose thick black hair is tamed into stiff braids. She is standing apart, eyes scanning the row of cars, a refugee on a hostile shore. When she finally sees our car, she shoulders her heavy book bag, and a smile lands on her face. She is not ashamed to show me the beautiful wall-off gap in her front teeth. She waves desperately, as if I might otherwise miss her, the lone black child in a sea of white. Finally, she opens the door and jumps into the back seat. "How was your day?" I say brightly, swallowing the stress of having to pick her up from private school every afternoon. She buckles in and opens her daily treat. Today, it's a bag of Doritos and bottled tea. No time to get to the store for apples. Bad mom. She says nothing but munches quietly and looks out the window. We pass the blonde girls yelling things out of the car like, "Call me if you want to go riding," or "Don't forget your swimsuit." At 10, my daughter wants, more than anything, to be chosen. She has a crush on Henry Frank. The kids call him Hank Frank as if it were one word. My daughter has a chance with Hank Frank because he's goofy funny, already eccentric, probably gay. I turn off the radio, which I often do when the kids are in the car, just in case something bubbles up from their mysterious lives. Lately, my daughter has become impenetrable. When I hug her, she stiffens. Even though I am her lifeboat, she will not touch me. She's the kind of lonely that cannot be explained, so it becomes someone else's fault, mine. "Did you know that I'm invisible?" Her words come in a scratchy little girl voice, but it's too old for make-believe. She is stating a fact. My heart is a block of ice. I glance at her in the rearview mirror. She keeps eating Doritos vacantly. Suddenly, I am 6. It's 1967, and my first grade teacher, Mrs. Houston, is so severe that every inch of me wants to please her. I figure out after the first day that I'm smarter than the other kids, the white kids. Every day, I want to prove my worth to Mrs. Houston by giving her the right answers. She calls on the other children. I don't understand why she doesn't see me. I stretch my hand higher, accent my eagerness with a few oohs. But she still gazes over my head to the dolts behind me with the ruby curls. This is not what I had imagined when I longed to go to school. I dreamed of friends and books and scissors and the sweet smell of paste. I dreamed of chalk scraping on the board and gold stars on my homework. I never dreamed I would disappear. My daughter finishes her Doritos and crumples the bag loudly. I stop the car in front of the manicured lawn of a stranger. I get out and open my daughter's door. She tracks me wide-eyed, afraid that she's in trouble. I unlock the seatbelt and pull her out of the car. Her classmates peer at us curiously as they drive by in their mom's SUVs. She doesn't know it yet, but after today, my daughter will never see them again. I take her shoulders and gaze into her eyes. I look at her so long that the hard resentment of her spine bends toward me. Her anger softens to tears. "I can see you," I say, taking her into my arms. So that story comes out of not directly out of my personal experience, but out of my experience being one of the first of the generation of integration children. So I didn't personally integrate any schools, but I was along for that ride in the 60s. And what was clear to me, especially after then raising my own children, is how much we traded as a people for education of our children. And that I think America in general think it's a value that Black kids get to go to school with white kids and they get to have what the white kids have. And if that means opportunity and new books and lab equipment, then yes, that's fantastic. What they don't know is it really was like sending your children out into a foreign land where they were often not wanted. And so what you're trading is educational excellence for the killing of your child's soul. And every day you had to repair that child when the child came home. And the child could continue to strive and go on to do amazing things But there will always be that kernel of damage that is very, very difficult to undo. And it's really difficult because it is unrelenting. It doesn't just happen in 5th grade, or it doesn't just happen in high schools. You know, it starts there and it continues to go and be reinflicted year after year. And so I wanted that story just to have a look. Like, this parent did the integration. And when she saw the damage happening to her child, even though she's clearly struggling to make sure her kids get a very good education. I mean, this is stress for this mother to drive back and forth and do what she has to do to make sure her kid's getting an education that she feels her child deserves. But in that moment, she decides it's not worth it. And that clearly she's going to make a different choice for her child. So I don't know if that's ever actually discussed, because we talk about integration as just a blank value, you know, an aspiration. And we don't really ever ask at what cost. We do to white kids. We say we don't want them to go to school with black kids because the education will go down. So it's not a value for white kids. It's only a value for black kids to go to school with white kids. And we don't talk about the cost to the black kids. Just throwing that out there. Any reactions to that? Yeah, sure. But just speak up. I'll repeat what you say, but speak up.
I had a similar upbringing as a kid.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yes. Yes.
My mom is just like your mother.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Like the fact that your parents see you, whatever, you know, like that's supposed to happen, right? I mean, you kind of take that for granted, or you assume that should happen. I know it doesn't always. But for your friends to see you, for that teacher to see you, and that's something your mother and father can't have no control over. And you as a little soldier, you know, have to go out and deal with that. And I remember not telling my parents when I got home what happened. Because then I started protecting my parents, because I knew that it was important to them for me to be there. I mean, that's a lot to put on a kid. Okay, so, you know, I don't do happy, if you guys so I'm sorry. I'm much more, I have much more levity like when you just talk to me, but my writing goes there. So anyway, I do want to read this piece that I wrote. I was started to do some writing about Detroit during the housing crisis, and all of these have been flash. And this is the one that John selected, and I thank him very much for that opportunity. And it's called The Good Hours. So The Good Hours, I love Robert Frost, and The Good Hours is one of his poems. So I'm going to read you his poem first. So there's ekphrastic poetry, and that's poetry that's inspired by art. So there's a painting, and poets will sit in front of there. Does anybody know if there's anything like fiction inspired by poetry? Like, what is that? But I literally took this poem and turned it into a story. Like, I was so inspired by this poem and translated it. So I don't know what that's called, but it was fun. In a sad kind of way, because, you know, of course, I don't have fun on paper. It's only Debbie Downer. All right, so this is called The Good Hours. This is Robert Frost. I had for my winter evening walk no one at all with whom to talk, but I had the cottages in a row up to their shining eyes in snow. And I thought I had the folk within. I had the sound of a violin. I had a glimpse through curtain laces of youthful forms in youthful faces. I had such company outward bound. I went till there were no cottages found. I turned and repented, but coming back, I saw no window, but that was black. Over the snow, my creaking feet disturbed the slumbering village street, like profanation by your leave at 10 o'clock of a winter eve. So this poem can be interpreted as an older man who's he's taking an evening walk in the snow, and he's sort of noticing all the life with the lights in the cottage, sound of a violin, the younger people talking, around their hearths. And so that's happened on his way out. When he turns back, by the time he turns back, people have turned off the lights and gone to bed, and he's totally alone on the street. And the only thing that's disturbing the street is the sound of himself walking. And so I don't know exactly how to transition here. So some people interpret that as death. When he walks out, he's sort of taking a last stock of life on his street, and as he comes back, he's either already dead or walking towards death, or symbolizes his death. I took the walk a little more literally than that, of what it's like to walk through a neighborhood and to imagine the life that's happening there. And you're going to hear some parallels between the poem and the story called The Good Hours. It's 9 p.m. and the night stretches before me like a glacier. Despite the fact that it started to snow again, I pull on my fleece for an evening walk. These days, I walk until the cold slows my heart and I can sleep without nightmares. Sometimes I have to walk 2 or 3 times before dawn to stay in front of the dread. There is a plague upon our house. It's making the thin wallpaper curl, the tongue-and-groove floors moan. We have lost our grasp on tomorrow. We pretend to still have jobs as we come and go, waving at the neighbors, but we all know that this infection will spread. At least once a week during my walks, I see a new sign, bank-owned or auction. Overnight, a white document appears on a neighbor's front door, the opposite of lamb's blood, a sign that God will not protect them. I've learned to detect the early signs. The yard service is the first to go. Grass invades the cracks in the driveway. Leaves mound like fresh graves. After a night of snow, sidewalks go unshoveled. Windows shutter. Porch lights shine all day long. Tonight, I say vespers for the Babcocks and the Lindsays. In 6 months, a year, there will be no survivors left on our block. I wonder if this is how it feels during epidemics, each house under quarantine, neighbors peering from behind curtains, hiding signs of financial ruin, people vanishing without a goodbye. In October, Teresa Madding had an estate sale. I went for the same reason we go to wakes, to check out the condition of the body. The Madding house was in surprisingly good repair. Their downfall must have been swift. There would be no trouble finding a buyer for a short sale. As I scoured Teresa's possessions, I was grateful that most of the people streaming in on that dreary autumn morning were not from the neighborhood. It's against the unspoken code for us to circle the pyre of our neighbors' belongings. On Teresa's dining room table, among 3 different sets of dishes, how much china does one family really need, sat the most exquisite terrine. Williamsburg blue, delicate white flowers laced with gold. Even then, I knew we were probably going to lose our home and the terrine would not survive our journey into the unknown. But in the moment, it felt like an inoculation of hope, a talisman to keep the infection from spreading to us. I snatched it up quickly and darted to the checkout. And that's when I ran into Teresa. It's a horrible slap to be caught paying pennies for your neighbor's belongings. Hello, I mumbled, angry at her for attending her own funeral. My terrine, she gushed. Said so many times during the holidays, you're gonna love it. She admitted the strange glee of someone who has lost everything. Thank you, I said. I should have said more. Once I got the tureen in the car, I started crying and couldn't stop. We never used it. When our real estate agent came to size up our house, she noticed the tureen in the china cabinet. I made her take it home. Tonight the air stings. The snow creaks beneath my feet, profane. No dog barks curiously. Hardly any doors bear holiday wreaths. This year we've been to no parties that spill their light into the stark drifts. Where is the sound of children next door practicing carols on their violins? The cold gnaws at my toes. My lips feel useless. I want to cry, but the frigid air has dried my eyes. This is somehow my fault. I should have saved more money. I should have left town a long time ago. I should have majored in something else. I should have married better or had one fewer child. Beneath a dim streetlight, I turn and repent. All the windows are blackened this winter's eve. The good hours have gone. Okay, and now I'm going to leave you with one last one. So I was telling the group earlier today that I'm a genre agnostic. I've been writing some essays here and there. I'm trying a novel. I do not recommend that process to anyone, except John. And I wrote this is flash fiction, but recently I turned it into a short film. It's a 7-minute long film. It has actually gotten into film festivals. And it is online. So if you Google Desiree Cooper and The Choice is the name of it, you will find it. If you are so inclined, this is political. If you are so inclined, I'd love for you to share it. It's free. And if you can share it to people who need to hear it, that'd be awesome for me. Okay, it's called The Choice. The moment we read the stick, some of us buckled on the bathroom floor. Having only bled once, we thought it was impossible. Having bled forever, we shook our graying heads and thought, this is no miracle. Susan, who at 14 still slept with her favorite doll, bit back the tears and started packing her bags. We knew our mothers would not believe us. Abby bought a ticket to New York to secretly take care of it. We locked ourselves in the bathroom sobbing while kids banged on the door, "Mommy, please, come out." Jade tried to convince her live-in girlfriend that she had only gone back to him once. For some of us, 3 healthy children were enough. For others, a special needs child was just too much. One day, we would have many children. One day, decades later, we would still be child-free. The ultrasound technician drew in a deep breath and did not let it out. Undecided, we waited too long. Decisive, we were instantly clear about what to do. We were happy about it until we weren't. We borrowed cash from friends so that it wouldn't show up on the insurance bill. We had no insurance. We had insurance, but the D&C was only covered for miscarriages. Brittany's college roommates threw her a baby shower with vodka served in sippy cups. On our knees, we asked God why the rape hadn't been punishment enough. Our aunt said, "You're lucky you won't be butchered in someone's basement like I was." Lynn was dropped off by her stepfather along with her suitcase and her cat. We called in sick at the firm, even though it was tax season. Mary's boyfriend slapped her and pushed her out of the car. "You better have dinner ready tonight," he said, "and your fat ass better not still be pregnant." The bus, a cab, the heat, a bike, the snow, the traffic. We were late, but we made it. We were 2 hours early because we couldn't sit at home alone. In the waiting room, we would not return a gaze. Our men held us tightly. Jan nervously fiddled with a ring from her make-believe fiancé. We were by ourselves and puffy-faced. Diane was already showing every time she seemed to show a few weeks earlier. One couple argued with the receptionist. They had driven from another state, but didn't know about the 24-hour waiting period. Some of us let the tears river, while others slumped in pink chairs, and listen to our iPods. We were horrified to be with these people. Full of shame, we fingered a rosary. Full of anger, we cursed God. Relax. The kind nurse held our hands as the doctor readied. You're going to be fine. We wondered if anything would be fine again. Annie quaked. The doctor took off his mask and said, I'm not doing this. You're not ready. We listened to the vacuum. We didn't know what hit us. When the room went silent, we rose up in wonder. It had been so easy. The nausea was over at last. For Kita, the nausea from the chemo would go on. We wondered if we would ever forgive ourselves. We didn't need anybody's forgiveness. Every recliner in the recovery room was full. It was over. We looked up. Many smiled compassionately. Some felt theirs was the only good reason. Liz, who still had 3 AP exams, didn't know who she was anymore. We wanted to hold hands. We wanted to get the hell away from these losers. We wanted to cocoon in our beds. We longed for our mothers. Some lovers promise, we'll try again when I get a job. Cindy wouldn't have to cancel her Paris vacation. Carrie forgot to ask if she could hustle that night. We realized how much our husbands loved us. Jenna had to wait until Child Protective Services came to pick her up. We were relieved that our grandchildren wouldn't see our swelling stomachs. Joyce didn't have sex until she was married 8 years later. Trish went back to work like nothing happened. We made a donation every anniversary. We were pregnant with memory for the rest of our lives. We never thought about it again. Thank you. And thank you, Aurora, for all your help pulling all this together. I forgot to thank you at the beginning.
We have time for just a few questions. Does anyone want to talk?
Did I bum everybody out? Mwah!
All right. I need to be like the man who has to ask the first question, but I'm very curious about something. I didn't realize until Stephanie read your bio that you had grown up abroad, and I wonder if your childhood abroad affected the way you saw race and class and gender in America when you finally sort of integrated.
So the question, I grew up mostly in Japan when I was abroad. My dad was in the Air Force. And so the question is, did that affect how I saw race and class and gender when I moved back to the United States? I do think, especially with regard to race, yeah, even though I lived in Japan, and one thing I learned early on in that racism might be one of America's biggest exports. So that there's hardly a culture now that doesn't value lighter skin over darker skin, and the Japanese are no exception. So there was a ton of racism against darker-skinned people. And you guys might already know, but Japan was very isolationist for a very long time. So overall, it's a very homogenous, tight community or culture that has had a harder time bringing in immigrants, like for labor or anything, because you have to be Japanese. So there was the fair share of racism there that I was exposed to, but I can tell you that it wasn't the travel or the upbringing that really opened my eyes about gender. Gender was an evolving, nasty surprise every phase of my life. So you start out, and everybody, the boys and girls are all playing together, and even in your own home, brothers and sisters, and then there's that moment. You can't do that. Don't wrestle with the boys. Don't play with your dad like that. Don't wear that. And so when that started happening, I'm like, but yesterday I could do this. And now all of a sudden I can't wrestle or I can't. And of course I was raised in a different generation. Sports were even very frontiersy for women of my age. But I do still see that, you go toy shopping and the whole aisle is pink for girls. Like every toy is pink. It's horrific. It's like, can I say it's like going into a vagina? Like, it's crazy. It's like, girl, What's the first thing you ask when a baby's born? You don't ask what color is it? If it's a mixed race couple, or even in the Black community, if you have 3 children, you have children of 3 different colors. Like they just come out the way they come out, right? And that's not the question. The question is it a boy or a girl? We have to know immediately how to treat this thing, this new thing. We need to know immediately what are the rules. And so what I found about gender is as I aged, there was a new rule. There was a new level of no, don't, and do it only this way. And I was horrified by that. And I was like, wait, I don't understand. And even with race, there are rooms where I am not a Black woman. When I'm with my friends, when I'm at a family Thanksgiving, there are no Black people in the room. There are just people in the room. I mean, even if there are people of other persuasions in my family, race doesn't feel like it's there. Gender is there because at Thanksgiving, the women are in the kitchen, the men are watching the game. Every day when I serve my family, it's my son or my daughter who might say, Mom, where are my shoes? Well, ask my ovaries. I guess because I have them, I know where shoes are in the house. That doesn't happen, the men get a different thing, but not that thing. So I found gender is a place that you cannot escape. Like the people that love me the most are sexist towards me. People who love me the most are not racist toward me. So there is no escape of gender. And that's why I think it's my obsession. And I don't think, if anything, my travel made me very confident that I could talk globally about women and gender because it was the same way everywhere. Mm-hmm.
One more question about gender.
So I read your book, and one thing I really liked is the fact that you talked about a lot of races, religions, cultural backgrounds, which I'm taking creative writing right now, and I love language writing, and I think that a lot of authors feel scared to misrepresent people. So I wonder how do you do that, and how do you do that? I feel like everything you wrote is very creative, and how do you make sure that you're representing
Mm-hmm. We had this conversation earlier today, and it was a long conversation. I think that the bottom line is you have to write what is true. And this is why people say you should write what you know, because if you write what you know, then you know where the truth is. If you meander out of that, there are landmines that you could easily step in. So a couple of the stories that I have do either take place in Japan or have something around Japan in the story. And that's because I lived there. I am not Japanese. I can't say I know everything about the land and the culture, but it was a profound influence on me as a child growing up. So I didn't place any stories in Germany because I've never been there, and I don't feel confident that I could do that. So, I think that's part of it. I also think one story, for example, you asked about putting the other in a positive light, and I'm not sure that totally happens in all of my stories. One story is about a Black woman who wanders off the base, military base, with her baby, the newborn baby, and the black woman is clearly a black person. The baby looks a little racially ambiguous. And the people, the mama-sans, the older women in the market, look at her baby and start to ask her questions like, is that your baby? And then are you with a GI? Are you with a white GI? And so the questions that this woman is clearly getting telegraphed is, what is a black woman doing with a white baby? And it's based on a Japanese perception around, especially around bases, where if you had mixed race children, it was because you were a prostitute. And so the inference was that this black woman pushing her own child in a market was a prostitute. And that's what they were basically asking her. And she understood the undercurrent of that. So that doesn't necessarily put the Japanese women in a good light. That wasn't sort of what I'm trying to do with the story. What I'm trying to do is talk about how race gets exported globally and how the perception of women as being used by men, and that certainly was Japanese women's experience. Guys, when they live close to the base. So it's complicated, but I wrote that very confident. I didn't completely make that story up because I understood that dynamic. So if you're going to go into the other, make sure you really know. Or one thing I was talking about earlier, let's say that you're a white writer and you want to write about race. Okay, I just want this one little reminder to be thrown out there. White is a color. White is a race or a European. Okay? Write about your own. You don't have to, cross boundaries and stuff to really do fantastic stories that have yet to be mined about how race affects whites in a completely white environment. How does it get communicated? How does it impact negatively, not only just about privilege, but the negative impacts? And what does that feel like? And how is it taught? And what is it like to be a child just learning these rules? Where are those stories? I want to read those stories. So if you want to write about race, and there's one that doesn't get written about in that way, vis-a-vis other races. So try it. I would love to read those stories.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.